Stubborn fat isn't stubborn. It's undefended. And there is a very specific difference between those two things. Stubborn suggests your body is actively resisting your efforts, working against you specifically. Undefended means something simpler and, in some ways, more fixable. Nobody ever gave your daily environment the 6 specific defenses that a huge number of Japanese households have quietly had in place this entire time, mostly without ever noticing they were defenses at all. 6 reasons. Not 6 willpower tricks, 6 structural, environmental, and cultural factors that shape how much a person eats, moves, and stores fat, largely before any individual decision-making or discipline ever enters the picture at all. And together they explain a pattern researchers and public health data have both consistently documented: substantially lower average obesity rates in Japan compared to most Western countries, sustained across decades, without the country's food culture ever centering itself around dieting the way Western food culture so often does. Stay with me until reason number 6, because number 6 is the one that ties the other 5 together, the reason none of this requires the kind of daily willpower most Western weight management advice assumes is necessary. But first, reason number 3 is the one that's going to surprise you, because it's not about food at all. It's about something sitting on nearly every street corner in Japan that simply doesn't exist, structurally, in most American neighborhoods, and its absence may be doing more work than any single dietary habit on this list. Let's begin. Most of us think about stubborn fat the wrong way. We treat it as an individual failure of discipline, not enough willpower, not enough consistency, a personal battle fought meal by meal against a food environment that never actually changes. Public health researchers who study population-level differences in obesity rates have increasingly moved away from this framing, because it doesn't explain why entire populations, with access to broadly similar food, education, and general awareness of health, show such consistently different outcomes over time. What research on this specific comparison tends to point toward instead is environmental and structural difference, the food that's actually available and marketed, the physical infrastructure of daily life, and the ambient social norms around eating, none of which require ongoing individual willpower to work, because they're simply the default conditions a person lives inside without ever having to actively resist them. 6 reasons. Each one a structural factor, not a personal discipline. Let's go through every single one. Reason number 1. A food retail and marketing environment structurally less saturated with ultra-processed food. You've probably assumed that willpower around processed food is mostly a personal trait. Some people are simply better at resisting it than others. Research on food environments points somewhere different. The sheer availability, marketing intensity, and default presence of ultra-processed food in a given environment is itself one of the strongest predictors of how much of it gets consumed, independent of any individual's personal discipline. Here's the mechanism. Ultra-processed foods, engineered for high palatability, calorie density, and marketing appeal, are measurably more prevalent as a share of total food retail and advertising in the United States compared to Japan, where traditional food retail, including smaller specialty shops and less heavily processed convenience offerings, still occupies a larger share of the everyday food environment. Research on food environment and obesity has consistently found that ultra-processed food intake correlates strongly with excess calorie consumption independent of hunger, largely because these foods are specifically engineered to override normal satiety signals more effectively than minimally processed food does. A population living inside an environment where these foods are structurally less dominant isn't exercising more willpower against them meal by meal. They're simply encountering fewer of the specific triggers that willpower would otherwise be needed to resist in the first place. The shift, the same amount of personal discipline, placed inside 2 structurally different food environments, produces 2 very different average outcomes, not because one population is more disciplined, but because one environment requires considerably less discipline to begin with. That is reason number 1. Now, reason number 2 is where this gets interesting, because it involves a specific food category almost entirely absent from a typical Western diet. Reason number 2. Regular consumption of seaweed and its unusually high viscous fiber content. Seaweed, kombu, wakame, nori, is a near-daily presence in Japanese cuisine, appearing in soups, salads, and as a wrapping or garnish, in a way that has no comparable equivalent in most Western diets, where seaweed is, at best, an occasional novelty rather than a staple. Here's the mechanism. Seaweed is an unusually rich source of a specific type of soluble, viscous fiber that forms a gel-like substance in the digestive tract, and research on this fiber type has found it slows gastric emptying and blunts the blood sugar response of the meal it's consumed alongside more effectively than many other common fiber sources. A meal eaten with seaweed produces a smaller, slower blood sugar rise than the identical meal eaten without it, directly relevant to fat storage, since sharp, repeated insulin spikes are one of the more consistently documented drivers of visceral fat accumulation. Consumed as a near-daily staple rather than an occasional addition, this effect compounds meal after meal, year after year, in a way an occasional Western side salad simply doesn't replicate at the same scale or frequency. The shift, a daily food most Western diets never include at all, is providing a consistent, meal-by-meal blunting effect on blood sugar spikes, a structural dietary difference operating quietly in the background of nearly every meal, entirely separate from portion size or calorie count. That is reason number 2. Now, reason number 3, the one I mentioned at the very beginning, the one that isn't about food at all. Reason number 3. Neighborhoods structurally built around walking, rather than around car dependency. Slow down here, because I know what you're thinking, that infrastructure. Here's the mechanism. Many Japanese cities and towns are built around dense, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods, with local shops, train stations, and daily errands reachable on foot, in a way most American suburban and even many urban environments simply aren't designed to support. Car dependency is, for a large share of the American population, a structural necessity of the built environment itself, not a personal choice. Research comparing obesity rates across walkable versus car-dependent urban design has found a consistent, independent correlation. More walkable environments are associated with meaningfully lower average body weight, even after controlling for income, education, and other demographic factors, because the sheer volume of incidental daily movement, walking to a train station, to a local shop, to a restaurant, differs enormously between the two environments, entirely apart from anyone's personal exercise habits. This is the specific absence I mentioned at the start: the wide, car-centric roads, the large parking lots, and the significant distances between daily destinations that define so much of American suburban design simply don't exist in the same form across much of urban and even semi-rural Japan, and their absence means daily incidental walking isn't something that has to be deliberately chosen. It's structurally unavoidable, built directly into how the environment itself requires you to get from one place to another. The shift, the same person, placed in a walkable environment versus a car-dependent one, ends up moving a substantially different amount over the course of an ordinary day, not because of any difference in personal motivation, but because one environment structurally requires far more incidental movement than the other ever does. That is reason number 3. Now, reason number 4, and this one addresses what actually fills the plate, distinct from how much of it there is. Reason number 4. A traditional meal structure built around a wide variety of small vegetable side dishes, rather than one or two larger components. A traditional Japanese meal often includes several small side dishes, collectively called okazu, alongside rice and a protein, each one a modest portion of a different vegetable preparation, rather than the one or two larger components more typical of a Western plate. Here's the mechanism. Research on dietary variety and satiety has found that meals composed of a wider variety of vegetable preparations, even at modest individual portions, tend to produce greater overall satisfaction and fullness than a meal with the same total vegetable volume concentrated into one or two larger portions, a phenomenon related to what's sometimes called sensory-specific satiety, where interest in and desire for a specific flavor or texture diminishes faster than interest in food generally. Meaning a varied plate keeps appetite engaged productively across several different modest portions rather than driving toward one larger, monotonous one. The cumulative effect, across a meal built this way, tends to be a genuinely high volume of low-calorie density vegetable matter, contributing meaningfully to fullness without contributing a comparable amount of calories. The shift, the same total amount of vegetables, served as several small varied dishes instead of one or two larger ones, produces measurably greater satisfaction and fullness, a structural difference in how a plate is composed, independent of any conscious portion control effort. That is reason number 4. Now, reason number 5, and this addresses a specific pattern in beverage culture that's easy to overlook. Reason number 5. Water and unsweetened tea as the overwhelming beverage default, rather than sugar-sweetened drinks. Sugar-sweetened beverages, soda, sweetened coffee drinks, juice, make up a significant share of the average American's daily caloric intake, often consumed almost incidentally alongside meals or throughout the day without being mentally tallied as food the way a snack or meal would be. In Japan, water and unsweetened green or barley tea are, by a wide margin, the more common daily default. Here's the mechanism. Liquid calories from sugar-sweetened beverages have been repeatedly found in research on beverage consumption and weight to be less satiating, gram for gram, than the equivalent calories consumed as solid food, meaning sugar-sweetened drinks tend to add to total daily calorie intake without producing a corresponding reduction in how much food is subsequently eaten, unlike solid food, which more reliably displaces some portion of the next meal. A beverage default built around water and unsweetened tea removes this entire category of easily overlooked, poorly compensated for calories from the daily equation almost entirely, without requiring any conscious tracking or restriction at all. The shift, the same daily routine, with water and unsweetened tea as the beverage default instead of sugar-sweetened drinks, removes a significant, easily overlooked source of daily calories, one that, unlike food, tends not to reduce how much is eaten afterward to compensate for it. That is reason number 5. Now, reason number 6, the one I told you at the very start, ties the other 5 together. Stay here, because this is the most important thing in this entire video. Reason number 6. Moderate eating is the ambient social norm, reinforced through everyday observation rather than individual willpower. This last reason isn't a separate structural factor in the same category as the previous 5. It's the social mechanism that makes all of them self-sustaining, generation after generation, without any single person having to consciously maintain discipline against a surrounding culture that's actively working in the opposite direction. Here's the mechanism. Research on social norms and eating behavior has found that people calibrate their own sense of normal portion size and eating pace substantially based on what they routinely observe others around them doing, a well-documented social modeling effect that operates largely below conscious awareness. In an environment where moderate portions, varied small dishes, and unhurried, non-distracted eating are the ambient default that nearly everyone around you is also doing, that pattern becomes internalized as simply how eating is done, requiring no ongoing individual willpower to maintain, because there's no surrounding norm of excess to actively resist in the first place. In an environment where oversized default portions, sugar-sweetened beverages, and hurried, distracted eating are the ambient norm instead, moderation requires constant, ongoing individual resistance against nearly everything a person routinely observes. This is the actual reason the previous 5 factors function as an interconnected system rather than 5 separate, disconnected facts. None of them require a Japanese individual to consciously fight against their surrounding food culture, the way an American individual attempting the same 6 behaviors largely would have to. The environment itself is quietly doing a significant share of the work that, in a different environment, would otherwise fall entirely on personal willpower. The shift, you don't need 6 times the willpower of someone living inside a naturally supportive food environment. You need to understand that a meaningful share of what looks like effortless discipline in one culture is actually an environment requiring far less willpower to begin with, which changes what you should actually be building for yourself, deliberately, if your own surrounding environment doesn't offer these same defaults automatically. That is reason number 6. Here is everything in one breath. A food environment structurally less saturated with ultra-processed food. Regular seaweed consumption, providing a daily viscous fiber blood sugar buffer most diets never include. Walkable neighborhood infrastructure that makes incidental daily movement structurally unavoidable rather than a deliberate choice. A varied, small dish meal structure that produces fuller satisfaction from less total calorie density. Water and unsweetened tea as the beverage default, removing an entire category of easily overlooked liquid calories. And moderate eating reinforced as an ambient social norm, requiring no individual willpower to maintain against a surrounding culture of excess. None of this is really about a uniquely disciplined population. It's about 6 structural, environmental factors that quietly do a significant share of the work that, in a different food and infrastructure environment, falls entirely on individual effort instead. Stubborn fat was never actually about a uniquely stubborn body. In most cases, it's about an undefended daily environment, 6 specific structural gaps that a different food culture simply never had to develop willpower to work around in the first place, because those gaps were never structurally present to begin with. So here's what I want from you before you close this video. Right now, tell me in the comments which one of these 6 structural factors is most absent from your own daily environment. Is it number 3, Is your neighborhood built entirely around driving, with almost nothing reachable on foot? Is it number 5, is a sugar-sweetened drink your automatic daily default instead of water or tea? Is it number 6, do the people around you eat in a way that makes moderation the harder, not easier, choice? Tell me the number, 1 through 6, in the comments right now, because naming it is the first step, and someone reading your comment might recognize their own environment in it and start thinking about how to deliberately build in what their surroundings never gave them for free. If this changed how you think about weight and willpower, send it to the one person you know who's been blaming themselves for a fight that was, at least partly, never really a fair one to begin with. They're not lacking discipline. They may just be missing 6 structural defenses nobody ever handed them. I'll see you in the next one.